With me now is a Democratic candidate for Florida Governor, Andrew Gillum. Mr. Gillum, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, let's talk about, cleaning up all that debris in Tallahassee, first of all, with Hurricane Michael that blew in now about a week ago.
Yeah.
You were out there shortly afterwards helping to clean up. How's Tallahassee looking right now?
Yeah, thank you for asking. I mean, that storm gained a lot of power pretty quickly, as you probably saw. Sunday it was a tropical system, and then Tuesday night we were talking about a Category 4 hurricane. My community, about 90% of the power was taken out. Our system heavily impacted, trees down everywhere. I'm thankful to say a week after the storm, we've got 99% of the people have their power back. And now Tallahassee has become the headquarters for relief for everything west of us. So the National Guard is staging out of there, a lot of relief going through there. We're trying to do the best that we can to be a good neighbor to our friends to the west of us.
Of course, your opponent, Ron DeSantis, pretty much spent the better part of a week criticizing you about Hurricane Hermine back in 2016, where it took, 3 days to restore power to 90% of the people there. How do you respond to that compared to, what went on here last week?
Well, I mean, I tell you, Mr. DeSantis gets to sort of sit in the cheap seats here. He's never had to manage a community through a storm event. In Hermine, we had the most powerful storm to hit our community in over 30 years. Over 85% of our grid system really knocked out. And the fact that we got 90% of the people there back up in power within 3 days was an incredible feat. And by the way, since we're in Jacksonville, I got to thank the Jacksonville utilities here, JEA, because they came over. In fact, a number of those same linemen I saw because they rode back into my community just this week to help us get back to 100%. And one of them came up to me and said, I saw those commercials, but I want him to know that we worked hard to get that job done. They took it with a sense of pride around what they were able to accomplish. And I share that pride. And I'm all the more excited that in this storm event, not only have we gotten our community back to 100%, our utility linemen have already been deployed to our neighbors out west, working to get them back together. The truth is in a storm event, this is the time that we as Floridians come together. We don't throw and lob shots at each other. We figure out how we can dig in there and help out. And in my opinion, that's what leadership is about.
We saw on TV, you were front and center on radio and TV telling people to get out of harm's way. And a lot of people were saying this was a kind of a test of your leadership. If this was a test, and I think you would say probably it was, how do you think you did?
Well, I mean, I think the proof is in the eating, right? We are a community that is almost back to 100%. We're a community that was absolutely impacted by the storm, but we are already now looking outward to our neighbors in the region and saying, you know what, for those in Mexico Beach, they've been hit pretty hard. For our friends over in Bay County and in Panama City Beach, in Jackson County and in Gulf County and Calhoun County, these are areas that have been ravaged by this storm. And what leadership is you put your house back in order, and then you figure out what you can do to help the rest of the state get back up to 100%. That's what we're doing. And I would say that if folks will have to measure me on what they think about the job that I did, but I will tell you, I didn't sleep at my house for 4 days. I didn't get power back to my house. I was part of the last 10% of people to get power restored to their own home. I left my wife and my 3 kids to do my job as mayor, and I came down off the campaign trail, took down all of my advertising and very critical weeks leading up to the election to do my job as mayor, because governing is more important than inspiring to be in the next job. I think that's how people ought to measure what we did here. And it's my hope that people will dig in to figure out what they can do to help our neighbors to the west get back up and going.
So you're back on the campaign trail now. You're here in Jacksonville, and you're here for something special, I guess, for at least a day or two. What are you going to be doing tonight?
Yeah, I'll be here throughout the day. We've got a couple of events. I've got a women's event today at lunchtime with our friend Donna Deegan, and this afternoon, a couple of meetings here in town. I'll be speaking at the Freedom Fund dinner gala tonight. And then this evening, headed down to Tampa, where we'll pick back up and do a town hall meeting and keep going. We are 19 days away. And as I've told my wife when I left the house this morning, we've been in this thing for 20 months. we can certainly make it, 19 more days to victory.
You got a big debate coming up on Sunday with CNN. The first debate with Mr. DeSantis was canceled because of the hurricane. Now you have one coming up on Sunday. What's the strategy? What are you going to be trying to get across to voters during
Well,
the debate?
I'm going to be honest with voters. I'm going to lean into the questions that are asked. I'm going to make the case as to why it's important that you elect a governor who believes in expanding access to Medicaid, helping to control health care costs, ensuring that persons with pre-existing conditions are protected, making sure that we pay teachers what they're worth, leaning into some of the environmental challenges that are impacting our state with the blue-green algae and red tide that is creating huge fish kills. I'm going to make the case as to why, based off of my experience and my vision for the state of Florida, why I will be the next best leader to lead the state of Florida into the 21st century.
You issued, at least your campaign, a cease and desist order, I guess, for a DeSantis ad about this ongoing FBI probe.
Yeah.
Now, this is over Tallahassee, but it's targeting you. How are you?
Well,
it seems like it's targeting, not his ad is targeting you.
Oh, his ad,
His
yes.
ad is targeting you, not the probe targeting you.
Right,
But
well, his
how do you
ad
get that
is.
How do you get that across to voters, saying what you want to say to voters about that?
Well, I mean, what I want voters to know is, one, I've been elected for 15 years by doing right, not by doing wrong. And that I have a zero tolerance policy when it comes to corruption or illegal activity, which is why we leaned in to help the FBI do its job. They're not investigating the city government. They may be looking at the actions of individuals there. And what we've said is, if someone has done anything wrong, they ought to be held fully accountable for their actions. Compare how I've dealt with the FBI and their inquiries to how Mr. DeSantis has. When it relates to Donald Trump, he has worked to undermine that investigation, even going so far as to suggest that a deep state is at work. Listen, leaders lead. You level with people. My grandmother used to tell me, if you tell the truth, you don't have to worry about covering up for lies.
Do you think that truth, though, is getting through to voters, or do you think there's some type of cloud over your campaign because of what's going on?
Not at all. I mean, we litigated this in the primary. I won the primary. We will win this general election, and Mr. DeSantis' cheap political attacks, I think, are going to fall flat. His ad has been rated false by PolitiFact. A Tampa news outlet, TV outlet, also rated his ad false, and yet he continues to air the ad. They also rated his Hermine ad as false. Both outlets, once again. And so Mr. DeSantis is showing that he's not prepared to level honestly with voters. And for that, I don't think he deserves consideration for the office of governor. I think the first job that you have to pass as governor of the state of Florida is that you're going to be honest and level with the people of the state. If they can't trust you to be honest as you're seeking the job, why should they trust you to be honest once you're in the job? He's got to answer that task. As for me, my values, my morals, my principles are intact. And they have always been intact for as long as I can remember. And it is my hope that people will measure me off of the arc of that work and not off of cheap political stunts by my opponent.
It takes a lot of money to run for any political office, especially Florida governor. And California billionaire Tom Steyer, has donated some money. Now, specifically to your campaign, $2 million recently, $5 million in a group before that apparently is going to be benefiting you too. That $2 million, and I was also hearing that is part of a impeach Trump campaign where 800,000 flyers are going to be sent out all across Florida to impeach Trump. You're for that too, in fact, I believe you still are. You said that last year. Under what grounds are you saying that President Trump should be impeached?
Well, I mean, the president himself admitted that he fired Mueller because he didn't follow his instructions. That is, unfortunately, not legal here in the United States for the president to impede on an investigation. But that being said, Mr. Steyer's support of me is largely based on the fact that I'm actually going to be a governor who believes in science. His organization, Next Gen, is an organization completely created around the idea that Florida and quite frankly the nation ought to be leading the rest of the world when it comes to climate change and sea level rise, and what we do to build our communities to be more resilient in that. As mayor of the city of Tallahassee, in that capacity, the same week that Donald Trump pulled out of the Paris Accord, I broke ground on a 120-acre solar farm, tripling the amount of solar energy that we produce. We're called the Sunshine State. We ought to at least make being the Sunshine State mean something. And so not only do I appreciate Mr. Steyer's support for those reasons, but I also appreciate the support of over 120,000 contributions that have come into my campaign from everyday people all across our state who are saying that they believe that the time for change is now and that we're the best candidate to deliver that change.
I believe you meant to say Mr. Comey instead of Mr. Mueller when it came to
the Mueller
firing.
Investigation and the Comey firing is correct. That during that Comey firing, the president, in my opinion, impeded on the work of the Justice Department and saying that he got rid of him because he wouldn't lay off of his friends. Well, the president, no matter how powerful a position it may be, also has to follow the law. This president did not follow the law, and he should be held accountable for that.
How did you get this California billionaire to support you and to support your campaign? What does he see in you, especially with someone with deep pockets, in order for you to possibly win this race?
I think what he sees is someone who I think is leading the kind of change around our environment that is desperately needed in the state of Florida. You'll recall that Rick Scott prevented his Department of Environmental Protection from using the words global warming or climate change in state documents. He has handed over the keys of environmental protection to the biggest polluters in this state. And as a result, we've got blue-green algae of guacamole content flowing out of the east and the west side of the state. Talk to the fishermen right off the coast here. Those who want to enjoy the recreational benefit and the quality of life that comes with living in the state of Florida that aren't able to do it right now because we've handed over the keys of environmental protection to folks who quite frankly have disrespected and degraded our environment. This state belongs to all of us. There is not a corporate profit. There is not a powerful enough CEO that should be able to corrupt our air quality, our water quality, and destroy our oceans and our beaches. Those assets belong to all of us, and we deserve a governor who's going to stand up against those big polluters and ensure that those environmental assets remain under the safe keep of the state of Florida for the benefit of the people of the state of Florida.
You know, some say that you and Ron DeSantis represent the hyper-partisan sides of voters here. But in Florida, there's a lot of middle-of-the-road Floridians who are going to be voting in November. So how is that strategy going to attract the voters to vote for you?
Yeah, well, I have to say, I don't think it's hyper-partisan to say that teachers who right now earn the 45th lowest average salary of all 50 states arguing that they ought to be paid a wage they can live on. In my opinion, as a parent to 3 children, to me that is completely in the mainstream of Florida politics. To suggest that people who right now, the 800,000 people who would have access to Medicaid if we were to expand Medicaid, to me, that's not hyper left or hyper right. It is common sense and it's decent that if we provide access to health care for that 800,000 people, that we will pull down $6 trillion, $1 billion that right now is being given to other states. It ought to come into the state of Florida and benefit the healthcare system here. And by the way, it will also save many of us who have healthcare right now the kind of premium increases that we're experiencing year after year. I don't think it's partisan to say that a person who has a pre-existing condition, a cancer patient, a diabetes patient, a pregnant woman in the state of Florida is considered a pre-existing condition. I don't believe that it is extreme to say that those folks ought to get access to health insurance.
Those issues, right, but abolishing ICE.
Replacing ICE.
And maybe impeaching President Trump. Some people calling you have your socialist ways.
There's no fact to back that up. It's not socialist to argue for health care. It isn't socialist to argue that somebody who breaks the law ought to be held accountable for their actions. And when it comes to ICE, I don't believe that it is consistent with the American opinion and belief that we ought to be separating children from their parents, that we ought to be separating nursing babies from their mothers. What we've said is that we ought to have the kind of immigration enforcement in this state where we put our eyes on the prize, which is making sure that dangerous criminals are not coming into our communities. And so instead, we're focusing on separating babies from their mothers. We're seeing tankers of fentanyl from Asia coming into the United States, yet Border Patrol agents can't focus on that because they are literally chasing down mothers and fathers and babies and trying to cage them. That doesn't make sense. It isn't what the American people want. It's not what Floridians want. And there's nothing, in my opinion, that's outside of the mainstream of saying that in America, we don't do that. Yeah. In America, we follow the law. In America, we enforce our borders. We don't separate babies from their mothers.
You mentioned a lot of issues that will drive voters to the polls today. Any key issues you think that will get that middle-of-the-road voter, maybe someone on the fence, to vote one way or the other?
Well, I think healthcare has got to be it. I mean, there are people in this state who are literally terrified that they may be one illness away from bankruptcy. My opponent has argued when a cancer patient said, how do they get access to health care? He said, you can always go to the emergency room. He has argued for insurance companies to be able to discriminate against people based off of pre-existing conditions. Even age in this state in some ways can qualify as a pre-existing condition. And in the state of Florida, if you're a pregnant woman, that is considered a pre-existing condition. His policies are wrong for Florida. His policies lie outside of the mainstream of what everyday Floridians are looking for. And unfortunately, my opponent has really no sympathy or understanding of what the everyday lived experiences are of people in this state, largely because he spent the last 6 years in Washington, D.C., and while there didn't pass a single piece of legislation, even as the member of the majority party. He only went there to vote against repealing Obamacare. Voted to take away health insurance, voted to raise the age of retirement to 70. These are people who have given their lives. They've contributed to this state in significant ways. They ought to at least be able to have the dignity that comes with retirement. Those are the issues that we're talking about, and I believe those are the issues that everyday mainstream Floridians care about, and that's why they're going to vote for me in this race for governor. That's why we're going to win this race.
Last time we talked, it was probably about a month and a half ago, when we were asking, so we saw those Ron DeSantis commercials. We haven't seen many Andrew Gillum commercials. Now we're seeing more of them now. Is that your strategy now to gear up between now and Election Day to flood the market with more of your name?
We're going to flood the market with volunteers. We're going to flood the market with folks, all types of communities, all kinds of background, getting out there, organizing their neighborhoods, and turning out to vote. As I've told our supporters at every single turn, I don't care that we're leading in polls. Polls don't matter to me. We didn't have a single poll showing that I was going to win the Democratic nomination for governor, yet we did it. What I care about is the only poll that matters, and that's the one on Election Day, which is why people have to activate, get out there and vote. In fact, early voting will be starting soon in Duval County, and we're hoping that people will get out there and make sure that their voices are heard.
You say you don't care about the polls, but I'm sure you look at them and you only see in many of these polls you're ahead by either 4 or 1 point, which is pretty much a dead even tie there. So there has to be something that's going to is going to be that close of a race, you think, at the very end?
I do. I mean, I think Florida is a 1% state. I think we're going to win by more than that. But the reason we're going to win by more than that is not because we're going to will it so, but because we're going to work it to be so. We've got over 300 paid organizers all around the state. We have thousands of volunteers in every part of this state. We were down in Putnam County. People thought we'd get maybe 100, 200 people, and we got there and the room was overflowing with over 600 folks. We went down to Flagler County, had the same thing. These are deep red counties here in the state of Florida. And as I said when I won that nomination, we were going to go everywhere. Red counties, blue counties, purple counties. And guess what we're finding? We're finding swells of support in all of those places. The reason we're going to win is because we're treating every single Floridian with respect. Whether they have an R behind their name, a D, an I, or no party affiliate, I want to be their governor too. That's why we're going to win this race, is because we're going after every single vote.
Florida voters, though, haven't voted Democrat for governor in 20 years. If you win, once again, you'll be the first African-American governor here in Florida. Has that sunk in yet?
It hasn't. I mean, I'm so focused on how we get through this race and make sure that we talk to as many voters as we can. I think part of the reasons why Democrats have found it difficult to win this race is that we treat the race for governor as if it's the Electoral College. You don't win one county and lose another, win one and lose another. The one who wins is the one who gets one more vote. It's my job to go out there and get that one more vote. And that vote may come from anywhere throughout the length and the breadth of this state. That's why we're prepared to campaign there.
All right. Andrew Gillum, you have a couple more weeks left.
Yes.
All right. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.